Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Julie and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode. Hey everybody, welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast. We are so excited to be back and getting going with the podcast again.
Yeah, we took what we thought was a short break, went to a little bit longer of a break, but wanted to give you a life update first because some of you have been following along since episode 1. So almost a year ago, we announced that we were pregnant with our 4th child, but then my water broke at 19 weeks, went on full-time bed rest after that at home, and then in the hospital at 23 weeks. And then our son, baby Jordan, was born at 25 weeks gestation. So he was in the NICU for almost 5 months. And then that brings us to November of last year of 2022. Mm-hmm. Feels so long ago, but so we were still doing weekly podcasts as much as we could throughout that time with guests, or you heard a lot of Thomas talking, and but then Jordan finally came home from the hospital in November, and that was exciting. But then he's almost 9 months old.
Yeah.
So he's still on a little bit of oxygen and has a feeding tube, and hopefully we'll do bottles soon, but he's our miracle baby, and we're really blessed.
He's one of 4 kids that we have.
Yeah.
So if this is your first time tuning in with us, you'll learn a little bit about us here. He's one of our 4 kids. We started off with twins who actually just turned 9 years old a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And we have a daughter who's about to turn 4 in just a couple weeks. And then there's Jordan.
Yeah. So we were talking about Jordan in November when he came home, and thank you again for all the prayers and celebrations for his life and his homecoming. And then December got really busy for us because, it's the holidays, but then my dad passed away from cancer. And so even though he was sick, it's still very unexpected. And the timing of all that, being home from the hospital, then going back to the hospital with him was a hard time. And so we finished out the year and decided to take a break from the podcast. So
yeah. And so what we found out is that you can't love people well if you're going through life too fast. And we were absolutely going through life too fast with all these different things that we were doing. And we needed a break for our family, but we also needed a break to get refreshed for our listeners and followers too. So we decided that we were going to take a short break for the Christmas and New Year's holidays. We were going to take 2 weeks off and thought we'd start back off at the beginning of January. And then now this episode is airing on March 20th. So it was a little bit longer.
Happy New Year.
2 weeks. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. We missed that one too. So it's been a minute since we've been on. And as our break pushed farther than we expected it to, we just began to realize that between our journey with Jordan in the NICU, how that stretched from June all the way to November, mm-hmm. and then your dad passing away in December, that we were basically just running on pure adrenaline in our family. And that wasn't just you and me, that was all of our kids as well.
Right.
And so once we decided that it was okay to take a break from the podcast, even for those first couple of weeks, it felt like our life started to have space to balance back out. And we just had to slow down and prune some things out to get ourselves and our relationship reset.
Yeah, I had someone explain it to me that made a lot of sense, that it's kind of like when you're going through crazy life things like that, it's like you're out in the middle of the ocean just treading water. And, just keep your head above the water. You're surviving. You're just going, like you said, on pure adrenaline. And then when you get to the shore, and I feel like that's what happened in November and December of last year, that's where you're just like, finally catch your breath. But then all the stuff that you just went through, like kind of crashed over you like the wave. So it's like, oh, we need to take a big breath here. And how many of you have felt that way? You're just pouring out and pouring out and pouring out, or you're out there treading water too. Maybe it's at work or with your extended family. Maybe it's your kids in school or you're in school or whatever. Fill in the blank there of you pouring out, and you just need to stop and ask yourself, what can you say no to so that you can say yes to the more important things in life? And this is a marriage podcast, so of course we're going to say, pour that time into your marriage. What do you need to cut out so that you can prioritize your relationship with your spouse?
Yeah, I love that thought. What can you say no to so that you can say yes to something else? And like sometimes it's good to flip that around in your mind too. Like every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so for us, we were saying yes to so many things like the podcast, and which meant by default, we were kind of saying no to our marriage, having space to kind of keep blossoming. And so we had to make room for that by saying no to the podcast for 2 weeks, which turned into 3 months.
Yeah.
And we just needed it. We realized once we got into it that it was okay for us to be released, to take a few months off for our family to get reset. And John Gottman describes it like this in a quote. He says, "I often think that if fitness buffs spent just 10% of their weekly workout time, let's say 20 minutes a day, working on their marriage instead of their bodies, they would have 3 times the health benefits they derive from exercise class or on the treadmill."
Yeah, we titled this episode "Love Has a Speed" because I just really felt that we weren't in a rush to hit record again, and it was kind of nice. Like, we miss you guys, don't get me wrong. We love showing up for you. We do a weekly podcast, and we loved that rhythm and consistency, but in that season, we weren't in a rush to hit record, and that kind of gave us that freedom. You said before that it wasn't that our marriage was on the rocks or anything bad. We really didn't want that to be the thought of that we disappeared. We were in touch with a lot of you, and luckily still did our marriage coaching clients to keep those up. And so also wanted to prioritize that instead of coming up with the content for the podcast. And so we just wanted to be more intentional during those busy times, those life and family seasons, to prioritize or get our priorities back in order. And that made, sense to put things over this podcast. But with doing that, we picked up a book, we shared a video about, and I think us just reading this, or I read it, I'm going to say, you've heard on other podcasts, Thomas is the audio books, and that's okay. We're like, get your hands on marriage material, marriage content to keep growing. And so since we took a step back from the podcast, we picked up a book, and I think we learned a lot of content that could take us for the next 12 weeks of this podcast. The book's called The 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work from John Gottman.
Yeah, and there's one specific part we wanted to just quote that we wanted to just read to you out of the book that kind of gives a little bit of insight about the book, gives a great insight about the book and why it's been so great for us, and why we think it's going to be great for all of you and for us to just talk about and discuss and dissect on the podcast. And so this quote says this: says no two marriages are the same, but the more closely John Gottman's research team and I looked at happy marriages, the more evident it became that they were alike in 7 telltale ways. Happily married couples may not be aware that they follow these 7 principles, but they all do. Unhappy marriages always come up short in at least one of these 7 areas, and usually in many of them. By mastering these 7 principles, you can ensure your own marriage will thrive.
Yeah, so this book talks about, like I said, 7 principles, but we got more than just 7, pointers out of it. So we're going to just walk through this book episode after episode. Like next week, we're going to be talking about friendship versus fighting, which is a fun topic for us to talk about too. We talked about how to fight well, because you're going to in marriage. So how do you do it? And still have a thriving marriage. And that's why I love that this is for maintaining a good marriage or repairing a marriage. We're always saying, going from good to better, taking couples even when they're coaching and finding your growth opportunities to keep growing. And so we've learned so much over, what have we been married, 16 and a half years?
Oh, you don't know, huh?
I had to think because a lot has happened since we've been recording. So
That's
I'm like,
okay.
yeah, March is, yeah.
I would have had a hard time on the spot answering, so I'm not.
Our anniversary is in September, so we're right about 16 and a half marriage. We've learned a lot. And then even in the past, year, just with all the life things, and then in this break, we're still trying to learn so that we can keep showing up for you guys. So we're excited to be back, and we hope that you join us in this. This is just a little intro episode, but it's still episode 75.
Yep.
We've been doing this for 75, so we hope that you join us for the next 75 episodes and then some. So if you're not already following us on social media and getting to know us there, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Marriage Puzzle. And we have a website, marriagepuzzle.com, or you can even jump on a Zoom call with us if you're interested in talking about marriage coaching or getting to know us more on a free discovery call.
And there at the website, you can also find this book listed. So you can go pick up this book before we really dive in to some of the deep content over the next few weeks. So make sure you go check that out. And next week, we're going to be talking about friendship versus fighting, like Julie just said. So we hope that you'll be there, and we look forward to you joining us next week. We're together. We'll work on marriage, one puzzle piece at a time. See you later.
Bye.